In August of 1686, King James II, the Catholic King of Great Britain, travelled with his wife, Queen Mary of Modena, to Holywell in a remote part of North Wales, where they visited a famous medieval shrine, a gushing spring emerging from a hillside called St Winifred's Well. In 1686, King James II was still without any heir to succeed him. Although James and Mary had been married for 13 years and poor Mary had been pregnant 10 times in that period, most of the pregnancies ended with the tragedy of stillbirth, and only one of the children born alive, little Isabel, lived beyond a year, and she died in 1681, aged only 4. Like many others who have come to this extraordinary and surprising place, they sought a miracle at St Winifred's Well that they might be blessed with a son. It's quite extraordinary that the King and Queen could make a pilgrimage to a Catholic shrine in late 17th century Wales, for rather miraculously the shrine was never properly suppressed at the time of the Reformation. Indeed, it is the only place in the country where pilgrimage has continued uninterrupted from the Middle Ages to the present day. And in this video, I want to explore the origins and history of this extraordinary shrine. I will look at the architecture of St Winifred's Well and give you a bit of a tour of it, and tell the story of just a few of those who, like James and Mary, have found solace and healing in this remarkable place. Thank you for all your support. If you enjoy my YouTube channel, don't forget that you can support my work further and help others see my content by liking, subscribing and sharing my videos. So who is St Winifred, and why is this her well? St Winifred was a very popular Welsh saint in the late Middle Ages who is said to have lived in the middle of the 7th century. Her cult came to prominence in the 12th century, and what we know of her story derives from two vita, two lives of the saint from that period, from the 12th century. The first vita is preserved in a late 12th century manuscript in the British Library, while the second was written about 1140 and is known from a manuscript in the Bodleian Library in Oxford. This second vita was written by Robert, the prior and later the abbot of the Benedictine Abbey of Shrewsbury. Prior Robert's Life of Winifred is not only an account of Winifred's holy life, but of the translation of her holy relics from Wales to Shrewsbury Abbey. More on that in a minute. Both are very short texts, and they agree on the main lines of Winifred's saintly story and her connection with the well. Winifred was born in the first half of the 7th century and was said to be the child of parents of noble birth called Tivid and Gwenlo. Her uncle was St Bino, a founder of many churches and monasteries in Wales, who had built a church in what is now Holywell. As a child, Winifred had decided to dedicate her life to God through chastity and prayer. However, a young prince called Caradog had other ideas. He was out hunting one day and called at Winifred's house to seek refreshment, and finding her there alone, tried to seduce her. Winifred then fled from the house to escape his advances, running towards her uncle's church, where he was preparing to celebrate Mass for the feast of St Alban. Caradog pursued Winifred all the way and caught her by the church door, and in a fit of rage he beheaded her. And where her head fell to the ground, a spring of water suddenly gushed forth, and that, the legend says, is St Winifred's Well. After Mass, St Bino then replaced his niece's head back on her body and restored her to life. He then cursed Caradog, who melted away like wax before the fire, we are told. A mark was left on Winifred's neck from her ordeal, a white scar like a thread. Winifred then dedicated the rest of her life to Christ, living as a hermit and then as a nun at Gwetherin, a remote spot in Denbighshire. In time she would serve as the abbess over a community of nuns, and there at Gwetherin she died a second time and was buried. Now you can't approach these vita, these hagiographies, these medieval lives of saints, as though they are biographies. As I'm sure I've said elsewhere on this channel, hagiography, which means saintly writing, is a particular Christian literary genre that is formulaic and has a precise purpose. A hagiography is intended to present the central elements of the tradition of a saint's life in a very formal way that emphasises the miracles associated with them, or their holy living, their saintliness. Winifred's, of course, does both. The purpose was firstly to encourage the hearer or reader to emulate the saint's holy life. Secondly, which should perhaps be firstly, they were written to popularise and to preserve the tradition of the saint's cult. In the 12th century, when St Winifred's Vita was written, many monasteries in England and Wales, without a homegrown saint from their own community or locality, began to look for saints' relics that they could translate to their monasteries from elsewhere. And in the 1130s, the monks of Shrewsbury Abbey in Shropshire, without their own relics, fixed upon translating the remains of Winifred from its obscure burial place in mid-Wales to their abbey. The story Prior Robert of Shrewsbury tells about the choice of Winifred is fascinating. In fact, he claims that Winifred chose Shrewsbury, not the other way round. According to him, a monk of the abbey fell ill, and during a vigil to pray for his restoration to health, St Winifred appeared in a vision to the sub-prior of the abbey, a man called Ralph, who said that if they prayed at Winifred's shrine in Holywell and celebrated Mass there, the monk would be healed, which apparently happened. In 1138, the monks dispatched Prior Robert to Wales to negotiate with the Bishop of Bangor to obtain Winifred's relics for the abbey. They were then removed from Gwetherin to the abbey, where they were then enshrined. And the shrine of St Winifred at Shrewsbury became an important place of pilgrimage that gave the abbey prestige. At the same time that he was in Gwetherin, Prior Robert also collected the story of Winifred's life, which had been passed down by oral tradition, which he then recorded in his Vita, so that that tradition wasn't lost and would provide a raison d'etre for this new cult in its new location. Now, if you fancy a rather fun and fictionalised version of this whole story, go and read Ellis Peters' novel, A Morbid Taste for Bones. It's one of her Brother Cadfael novels. Prior Roberts says in the Vita that after the healing of the monk by Winifred's intercession, the whole community of monks from Shrewsbury went to Holywell to bathe in the well. And this is the earliest reference we have to the well being used as a place of pilgrimage. In the 1230s, Dafydd ap Llywelyn, the Prince of Gwynedd, gave the site of St Winifred's Well to the Cistercian monks of Basingwark, which was a house just a few miles up the road on the River Dee. And it was they that really developed and promoted St Winifred's Well as a shrine and a place of pilgrimage. By the 14th century, very large numbers of pilgrims were venturing to St Winifred's Well, and it became one of the most important shrines in the country, next only to Walsingham and Canterbury. And pilgrims included the nobility of England and Wales, and even royalty. King Richard II came here in 1398, the year before his deposition, and he gave money to the building fund. While King Henry IV, the man who usurped Richard, came here in 1403 after his victory at the Battle of Shrewsbury to give thanks for the survival of his son Henry of Monmouth from an arrow wound to the head. He gave money to build a new chapel here as well. Of course, Henry of Monmouth became Henry V, and he appears to have had something of a devotion to St Winifred after 1403, and in 1416, giving thanks for his great victory at Agincourt, went first to Shrewsbury to venerate Winifred's relics, and then walked the 70 miles to Holywell. All this royal patronage helped build up the shrine's prestige. So that's the history. What about the well and the buildings that survive around it? The structures surrounding St Winifred's Well are some of the most unusual and complete late medieval buildings in Wales. None of the buildings here date from before the first decade of the 16th century. In the early years of the 16th century, when pilgrimage here was at its height, the monks of Basingwark entirely redeveloped the site and constructed a series of new buildings. Now today you enter the well from the north through a small visitor centre that used to be a swimming pool, and the first thing you see ahead of you is a 2-storey building with 3 great open arches on the front of it. This is the well house that shelters the spring, and above it, on the first floor, is the chapel. All of this is constructed in fine ashlar stone in the perpendicular style of Gothic architecture. In front of the well house itself is the Great Well Pool, which has been used by pilgrims for bathing for centuries, and you can still bathe in it today if you'd like to. The first time I visited Holywell in 2016, the place was thronging with people taking a dip here. I wasn't quite brave enough to do so. On my recent visit, there was a lady from Norfolk in the pool, and she permitted me to film her for this video. Now, if you are brave enough to get in the water and you come here with a specific prayer intention in mind, it is the tradition to immerse yourself in the pool 3 times, preferably on 3 consecutive days, and it is said that your prayer will be answered after the 3rd dip. In 1920 there was a bit of a crisis as the well water dried up due to water being diverted in a mine drainage scheme nearby, and a new supply then had to be found. Before that crisis, a virtual torrent of waters flowed from the spring. Dr. Johnson, who came here in the 18th century, reckoned that 100 tonnes, around 2,500 gallons of water a minute, was flowing from the spring. You can see this torrent in old prints of St Winifred's Well, such as this engraving by Francis Place of 1699. You can see women washing their clothes in the vigorous outflow of the well. Once leaving the great pool, the water flowed north, forming a turbulent stream that fed a whole series of water mills and eventually went out to the sea. Now the stream has gone entirely and the water is discreetly piped away from the pool. In the bottom of the old stream, long gone, there were once lots of little stones covered in red lichen, which were said to be drops of Winifred's blood. Behind the pool is the well house, which contains the source of the bubbling spring, and the spring emerges from the bottom of a stone cistern, which is contained in a cage-like stone structure. On all sides around the cistern is a walkway or ambulatory where pilgrims can gather and prepare to enter the waters. This is divided from the cistern by a colonnade of 5 sections, and it has been suggested that the whole design of the well house emulates the Pool of Bethesda in Jerusalem, which according to chapter 5 of St John's Gospel had 5 porticos. It was the site of one of Christ's miracles. The vaulted ceilings of this glorious space are quite spectacular. They're decorated with carved bosses that in some cases bear the coats of arms of the prominent people who contributed to the construction work. It has been suggested in the past that the work was paid for by Margaret Beaufort, Countess of Derby, the mother of King Henry VII, but there is no evidence for that. The work was probably commenced in 1512 by Abbot Thomas Pennant of Basingwark, and was not completed until 1525. The roof of the chapel above has been dendrodated to about 1525. The arms of the Stanley family, that of Margaret Beaufort's husband, the first Earl of Derby, are prominent, but they're likely simply benefactors to the Abbey's fund rather than instigators of the work. The central pendant boss over the spring cistern is decorated with scenes from the legend of St Winifred, and at the base is the royal coat of arms. All the bosses are somewhat worn, as the whole well house interior has been exposed for 500 years to the elements. In the well house is also a modern statue of St Winifred, which is housed in a medieval niche and replaced a medieval image of her, which was destroyed at the Reformation. Now, directly above the well house on the first floor is a chapel that's dedicated to St Winifred. The whole structure is a very refined and elegant example of late Gothic architecture, spacious inside with a 3-sided apsidal chancel. The well house is open to the public and is a national Catholic shrine, but the chapel is maintained by Cadw and you must ask for the key. Since the 20th century, the entrance to the well and the shrine has been reversed, and so you can't get the full medieval pilgrim experience when you visit. These days you enter the shrine from the north, but late medieval pilgrims would have entered from the south. They would have first gone into this glorious and spacious upper chapel and heard Mass, and would then have gone down a series of steps at the west end of the chapel that connected directly to the porch attached to the well house below. At some point, this entry down to the well was blocked, probably in the 20th century. At the time of the dissolution of the monasteries, the relics of St Winifred at Shrewsbury were destroyed, but the well somehow wasn't, and it continued as a place of pilgrimage. As monastic property, it was confiscated and was leased for secular use, but the pilgrims just kept coming. There was a significant recusant Catholic presence in the area in the 17th century, and that probably assured its continuation, and local Catholics were served by a series of Jesuit priests all the way through penal times. In the early 18th century, the Catholic presence waned to some extent, but pilgrims still came to this place seeking a cure from the waters. On the stonework of the well house, countless pilgrims through the generations have scrawled their names, some giving thanks for their cure in the waters. We have names from the 16th to the 19th century and from various locations, many people travelling from Ireland to be here, and they make for moving reading. T.M. Carew, Esquire of Westmeath, writes his name in a bold, neat hand, and that he was cured here in October of 1831. There is an astonishing print by Moses Griffith, published in Pennant's Journey to Snowdon, that shows the interior of the well house in 1784, and hanging from the vaulted ceiling and poking through the gaps in the tracery can be seen the countless crutches and walking sticks of those who are cured by the waters of the well of their many ailments. Some of those sticks, long since removed from the upper reaches of the well house, have been preserved in the little museum in the well grounds. It is a moving display. There was a celebrated case of a cure at the well in 1805 that was the cause of great scrutiny. It was of a 26-year-old servant from Wolverhampton called Winifred White. She developed a serious physical disorder that afflicted her for 3 years. It began with a pain in her left side and then progressed to her spine, and it rendered her left hip so immovable that she walked with a crutch, dragging her left leg behind her. Doctors tried every remedy to cure her, but to no avail. By the time she made the journey alone to the shrine of her namesake by postchaise in June of 1805, the whole of her left side was paralysed. Winifred was a pious young woman, and following immersion in St Winifred's well, during which she felt a peculiar warmth throughout her whole body, she found that she could stand upright with no pain and could dress herself, and she walked away from the well unaided, leaving her crutch behind her. An account of this event was published afterwards by the Catholic Bishop John Milner, who, sceptical of what he was told, interviewed Miss White, the doctors who had treated her, her friends, employers, and a plethora of unrelated witnesses, both Catholic and Anglican, from Wales, Liverpool, Wolverhampton and elsewhere, who all either witnessed the event or saw Miss White's changed condition. Bishop Milner's conclusion, against his natural scepticism, was that her cure at St Winifred's Well was an evident miracle. As for James II and his wife Queen Mary of Modena, who came to St Winifred's Well in 1686 seeking a remedy for their childlessness, in June of 1688, 6 months before King James would be overthrown in the Glorious Revolution and would flee to France, the Queen gave birth in St James's Palace to the longed-for son and heir, James Francis Edward Stuart, Prince of Wales, who in time would be known as the Old Pretender. It seems, at least, that their prayers were answered. It is difficult to know what to make of such things and miracles, particularly if one is a questioning type, but St Winifred's Well has an atmosphere that draws one in, and there is clearly something in the curing properties of the waters here. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy this channel, you're bound to enjoy my magazine, The Antiquary. Published every month, it is a labour of love for me, and in it I explore some of the more obscure aspects of our shared history, all beautifully illustrated in full colour. It ships across the world, is offered in print and digital format, and readers give it 5 stars on Google. If you love your history like me, particularly the history of objects, buildings, people and places, why not consider subscribing? Subscribing helps support my work and the channel too. There's a link above and in the video description that takes you to the magazine website.